Good afternoon. I'm your host, Nicole Harling, for the Parent Advocacy Program. Today's program is a special program involving Black history. We have an esteemed guest on our program today, so please come back. Thank you.
Okay, kids, here we are at the slavery exhibit. Now, as you can see, the slaves were kidnapped from their homes, chained together for weeks. They would cram them onto these ships in very appalling conditions.
Thousands of women and children are being smuggled across the border.
Sexual trafficking of children.
As you can see right here, they were treated like animals. They worked all day long for no pay.
In sweatshops raided by police, children forced into slave labor.
Some of the slave masters were very cruel. They whipped them and they beat them, as you can see in some of these pictures.
Torture and assault be brutal, even fatal.
So, before moving on, are there any questions?
Does this still happen today?
It greeted you at birth. It was there for your first step, your first mistake, your first kiss. It's with you when you win, when you lose, when you pick yourself up again. In every moment, you can feel it. Life. Human right number 3, the right to life. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
Hello again, this is Nicole Harling, your host for the Parent Advocacy Program. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Mr. Ted Kirkland. Ted, welcome to our show today.
Well, thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure.
You are well known in the city of Buffalo. Tell the viewers a little bit about your background.
Well known because I've gotten old in this town. I guess that's about the extent of it. Well, I think most people know me, Nicole, from my police days. You know, when I was a police officer, and I left the police force, and actually I only served 15 years and 9 months there. But then I left the police department and went into on the state parole board. I was appointed by Governor Hugh Carey back in 1978. I left there 7 years later when I wasn't reappointed by Como. He didn't like me.
Oh.
And I didn't like his prison expansion program either, so that was, it was a mutual relationship there.
Okay.
But then I went into teaching at the Hunter College in New York City, University of Buffalo. And I went into, as a matter of fact, I created, which was kind of interesting because what I did was I created some jobs, some part-time jobs.
Great.
Part-time teaching at 2 colleges, radio show at Buffalo Radio, writing for the Challenger newspapers. I had 4 jobs, part-time, and still wasn't making much money. But and so that's basically you know where I'm at. And my wife and I, come May, would be celebrating our 52nd wedding anniversary. I never thought I could think in terms of 52 years of marriage, but that's what we're approaching.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. Well,
And
that's
during the
good.
course of those years, I know your relatives, you know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Lois Harding was a great
Yes,
friend
she
of my
was.
mother's.
My grandmother,
and,
Lois Harling, absolutely.
Ed, I knew Ed for years.
Yeah, Ed Harling,
Bob,
my
he
father.
just passed away.
Yeah, my
so.
uncle. Good, good. Well, we wanted to have you on the show today because we wanted to get your perspective in regards to some of the experiences you've had with Black history. Well, not with Black history, but some of the experience, period. And one of the things I want to ask you, being that you've been around for a little bit, not saying that you're old though, being that you've been around for a little bit, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, where were you? And how did you feel? How did that shape you? And that's a really broad question, but I think somebody with your caliber and your experience, it'd be good to hear your perspective from that.
Well, at the time of Dr. King's assassination, you know, I was a police officer, and I was off duty that day. I was at home, and when the announcement was made over the television, and it's very difficult to say how I felt because I have to put everything else in context. Thinking in terms of previous assassinations, you know, before him there was Malcolm.
Yes.
Malcolm was assassinated in 65, February 21st in 65. And then to have King behind him on April 4th of 68. And, you know, I think there was an initial feeling of fear, you know, the fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing what was happening here. We had, of course, there were assassinations taking place in some African countries where the U.S. was implicated, you know, in the killing off of, you know, some of those leaders, you know, who were fighting for, you know, to get fighting their way out of colonialism and those kinds of things. There were assassinations in the South. You know, there was Medgar Evers, for example, who was assassinated in 1963. You know, who was the leader of the NAACP in Mississippi. So, you know, those kinds of things were happening, and think in terms of the people that were being shot and beat to death, because throughout the world, you know, black folks were on the rise. You know, they were shaking the shackles of colonialism and shaking the shackles of racism and segregation. So when King, you know, who I think most people felt would be the least likely to be assassinated because he wasn't talking violence. He was talking love thy neighbor, you know, love thy enemy, and that kind of a thing. So we weren't looking so much, I think, for him to be. Even though Malcolm, when he was killed, it was shocking, but it was a thing of, well, you know, maybe you can almost understand some of that. So
a little more radical views.
Yeah, these views were a lot more radical, and but King was a totally different story. So that was a thing of shock and a combination of fear.
And you being a Buffalo police officer at that time, and then hearing Martin Luther King got killed, you know, what was the environment like, particularly where you worked at and so forth?
Well, then I went to work the next day, and I was working with a partner, Clifford Brockington, and I don't know if you know him or not. His wife's a school teacher in Clifford. And Cliff and I both were off because we were partners, and we went to work the next day. And we were working on a special squad, tactical patrol unit, they called it. And when we went in that evening, and we had to be to work like at 6 o'clock. And when I first walked in the door, it was kind of interesting because one of the white officers said to me, what do you do? You must get notified ahead of time that these things are going to happen because you were off when Malcolm was killed, you're off when Martin was killed, you're off when the riots took place, and whatever. And it was kind of a question where I said, well, heck, ain't no sense in me answering this stupid question because I have nothing to do with signing my days off.
Exactly.
And so then I went on and started getting dressed, and Cliff and I noticed that none of the, and we were the only two blacks there now, none of the white officers were wearing any kind of identification. They had taken their name tag off, the reef off their cap, taking their badge off, and we understood what that meant.
Really? Wow. Well, you know,
this is
hold
second
that thought. We're going to come right back on that because I want to know more about what that meant. It's very interesting. Sounds like they maybe thought some retaliation, but we'll be back on that. So come back, and we'll hear more from Mr. Kirkland and his experiences with that. Thanks so much. Please come back.
Can you tell which of these children was not born free? Can you tell which of these children was not born equal? Can you tell which of these children does not deserve to be treated with dignity? We can't either. Human right number one. We are all born free and equal. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
I'm Chinese.
I am Russian.
I am East African.
I'm Canadian.
I am Filipina.
I am Irish.
I am Bulgarian.
Korean.
I am American.
I am Brazilian.
Italian.
Mexican.
I'm British.
Swedish.
French.
I'm Israeli.
Mongolian. I'm South African.
Japanese.
We are mankind.
Hi, welcome back. Again, my name is Nicole Harley. I'm your host today for the Parent Advocacy Program. We have our guest today here, Mr. Ted Kirkland. And when we left off last, we were talking about after Martin Luther King's death, you went to work and you were mentioning that you noticed that a lot of your white officers didn't identify themselves with their name tag or the badge number. And what did you feel about that? Did you think that they were, they thought maybe there'd be some retaliation with that?
Well, Cliff and I, we understood, the meaning of that, and the meaning was very clear. I mean, it wasn't something that was just happening in the Buffalo PD. It was happening all over the country to a great extent, many other places. That the idea there was if they had to go out and really hurt someone that night, they didn't want to be identified.
Right.
If there's going to be a big riot and someone is killed, they don't want to be identified. That's what it meant. So what we did, we went in to see the lieutenant, and we said to the lieutenant, told him what was happening. And he says, well, I'll be out of my office in a few minutes, because what he had to do was come out and give us our assignments. And when he came out and we lined up and he gave us our assignments, and then and as if an afterthought, because he's walking away and he hadn't mentioned this thing, and like an afterthought, he turned and he said to the men, he said, oh, by the way, Kirkland and Brockington came into my office and said that you men are not wearing your name tags. And all of them laughed and they walked away.
Wow.
So we went out into patrol that night, and we had we were riding 3 deep that night, because one of the white officers were assigned with us, but he was the white officer who they didn't like. So you put 3 dislikes together is the idea here, and he was a real nice guy, the white officer. He was a fairly nice guy, but he was a go along to get along type person. So when he gets in our car, we said, well, you got to put all your stuff on. So he had no argument. He put everything on.
Great.
But we noticed that night that the officers had put all their name tags on, because they didn't want any renegades.
Right.
So they put their name tags on and so forth and so on. So we didn't have any problems with that.
Did you notice that when you went out that night, the day after Martin Luther King got assassinated, that not only were you, of course, a Buffalo cop, that you had to kind of have to talk to the citizens, kind of, I guess I don't know, like being a counselor, or just kind of, quell their fears, since you were in a position of authority?
Well, we didn't have that problem. I've been doing that. That was part of my career. I had a relationship in our community. The young folks knew me. The older folks knew me. The older folks trusted me. The younger folks trusted me. So it wasn't something of introducing myself.
Right.
It was just being there.
Was probably even better.
That's all.
Yeah.
Just being there, and it would make them feel better just knowing that I'm there. That second night, we had a few fires and that kind of stuff, but nothing really, outlandish.
What did your counterparts, your white officers, how did they relate to the community they were patrolling?
Well, of course, it's not their community. When we talk in terms of community, I think if I understand you correctly, we talk in terms of primarily, and that's where we were concentrating in the black neighborhood,
right.
And it's not their community. And oftentimes what you find with white police officers, they're trying to emulate sometimes the television police. They want the excitement.
Like the Law and Order.
And you have to be around many times to calm them down, to keep them from going overboard. Oh, yes. And the system basically protects them. I mean, you cannot tell me the last time a police officer in Buffalo has been convicted of killing a black person, but black people get killed by cops.
Right. Oh.
Okay?
Yeah.
You don't see that.
Right.
And that's under, they understand that, that the jury's not going to convict them. You're not going to get a Erie County jury to convict a white cop for killing somebody in the black community. It's not going to happen.
Wow.
No time soon.
Wow.
It's got to be really overboard.
Now, that was, that happened over, 40 years ago or so.
Well, that was, you want to know the exact time? That was like 41 years ago.
41 years
We're
ago.
talking in terms of 1968.
What do you see now? What do you see the difference now? I mean, though you're a retired policeman, I'm sure you talk to a lot of them. What do you see a difference between the attitudes now, particularly with the community and attitudes back then?
Well, let's go back to King for a second.
Sure.
You know, Dr. King's theory was, and the whole civil rights movement that came under him, the nonviolent civil rights movement, had to do with nonviolence because and you had to be able to tolerate getting hit upside the head and all those kinds of things. And the purpose for that was to make your enemy feel guilty. But at the same time, let the world see how violent your enemy is. You see, there was a theory behind that. And so, and it worked, you know, because it was televised all over the world, you know, and television was coming in. I guess without television at that time, it could have, the whole movement could have been a failure.
Right.
So you needed that. When we talk in terms of 41 years later, or a little more longer than 41 years later, we talk about, and we have to look at the police department at that time, and we only had about 25 black officers on. And now when we look at it after the lawsuit that we filed back in 1973, we have now somewhere in the neighborhood of probably about 250. And instead of the police officers changing, I'm talking in terms of the white officers, instead of white officers changing, what has happened is that black officers changed to be more like the white officers.
What do you mean by that?
It means that they took on their personality. They took on their likes and dislikes. When you get out of that academy, you go into the academy, you're brainwashed to a great extent. You know, you're being taught to be a police officer from the white perspective. You understand what I'm saying? You know, and the way they see things. And you're being indoctrinated to hate those they hate.
Right.
Or to see those that are their enemies to be your enemies. And they're our people.
Right.
I mean, when I got out of the academy, I was 28 years old, but I'd already been in the military. So I had a little cushion. But for a moment in that academy, they had me afraid to walk my own street where I lived because of the films and the still pictures and of these gory homicides, and they would train you that blacks on the corner were more dangerous than whites on the corner. Blacks on the corner were gangs.
Right.
White kids were fraternity groups or something. They'll
Yeah.
cut you. The blacks will cut you. So you're really conditioned.
Yeah.
And so what we see today is that this tremendous change that have come over black, and it's not just the black cop. You see, it's not the black cop. It's all of them, be it teachers, firemen, or what have you. They are less dedicated to black people today than they were then.
Wow.
The few we had, okay?
Wow. Well, you know what? We're going to come back on that because what I want to discuss is next steps, particularly with the recent election of Barack Obama, you know, how that affects, if it does at all, what you're mentioning, and you're smiling, so sometimes you have a,
maybe because I'm warm, all right?
Okay.
The lights are hot, huh? You okay?
Well, we'll be right back, so please join us.
Next case.
The People versus Martin White. Mr. White has been charged with...
Guilty. Next case.
But Your Honor, you haven't heard the charges yet.
Guilty. Next case. Guilty. 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 Life in prison. Guilty. Next case.
Different words describe different people. But in the eyes of the law, there's one that fits us all. Human right number 7. We're all equal before the law. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
Welcome back. Again, my name is Nicole Harling. I'm your host today for the Parent Advocacy Program. We're with our guest here, Ted Kirkland, and where we left off, you mentioned that policemen, or basically not just policemen, a lot of people in public service, period, are brainwashed to kind of go against their own or to have a negative image of their own. How do you think the local or the election of Barack Obama has changed that? If it has, maybe not. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't think it has changed it. I think it basically has reinforced it.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think what happens at this point. Remember now, that Barack Obama had to repudiate Reverend Wright.
Yes.
And Reverend Wright hadn't said anything wrong. That reverends and others, in the civil rights movement, had been saying, and the conditions he talked about existed.
Matter of fact, that I've heard also that Martin Luther King, back then, it was even more of a radical, similar to Reverend Wright, but a lot of those speeches don't come to the forefront.
Yeah. Well, if you read, you're absolutely correct. If you listen to the tapes or you read Martin Luther King's Vietnam speech, he's very clear on that, and he said the same identical thing he said the thing that Reverend Wright said.
Absolutely.
And so that in itself is frightening because what's happening is that black people now are being more susceptible, to I guess we'd put it maybe to be punished in some sort of way, for identifying with themselves. And their particular problems. So when you have school teachers, and I've had school teachers call me up and say things like, that's when I was writing all the time, I know that our black boys are being misused in schools, but I'm not going to sacrifice my job for them. We had here in Buffalo, for example, a black woman who stood up for a black man, but the other black officers on the scene would not stand up for her. You understand? You see?
Yeah.
And that's something that's happening, but the community accepted all of that.
It seems as if with the election of President Obama, you hear in the media, it's like, oh, Martin Luther King's dream was fulfilled. But I also see some other folks saying, no, it hasn't been fulfilled. It's a good thing, but it's not like it hasn't washed over everything that's happened in the community, in the black community. Do you see that in your travels?
I think what the problem here is, of course, those people who are in power positions want to say to you that it has been fulfilled by the elevation of one person to be president of the United States. To be president of the United States, salary is somewhere about $400,000 a year. Time Warner director, which was a black man here not too long ago, he was making 8 figures. You see, so and I only said that to maybe show which one probably should be more important. But the president is only the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, and if anyone paid any attention to the oath of office, he has to uphold what? The Constitution.
Right.
The Constitution is a racist document. We're 3/5 of a person according to the Constitution. See, so, but he upholds the Constitution, not necessarily our rights. He said from the beginning he was not in favor of reparations. He said he's in favor of the death penalty. And this isn't taking anything away from him. I think we have to put things in perspective. They got him for his talents, not to resolve the problems of black people. They got him for his talents. They got him because this country, these United States of America, is in trouble worldwide with every country of color in the world almost. And it looks good for them to have a person in a leadership position. They tried it with Colin Powell. They tried it with Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State. They have not been able to do it. Now they put the presidency.
They even have a head of the RNC who's now black.
Right. But you see, and when China moving into, have moved, say, into Africa, they're getting the benefits of Africa now. And that's where the resources are. The United States need help in that area because they have created all these enemies among poor people, whether it's in South America, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in Africa, you name it. Their reputation is bad. So they need a Obama, a different kind of personality. And not just the U.S., but also Europe. And I'll remind you of something. When he was running for office, where did he go where he got those large crowds outside of the United States?
Caucasus states primarily. I would
No,
think.
I said outside of the U.S.
Oh, outside of the U.S. I
What
don't know.
countries? He went to Europe,
Well,
and he had crowds of people.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't go to Africa. He didn't go to South America. Am I right or wrong? It was Europe, because see, Europeans are tied into the U.S. and they're all in trouble, and they're looking for a savior. Okay, because their countries are in trouble with resources, and Africa and some of these other countries of color are the ones with the resources.
Now, speaking of that, kind of going off on a little tangent, you know, Barack Obama's in office, and you hear a lot of children and young people say, now, you know, whatever I can do, you know, I can do it. I have belief in myself and so forth. What can we as a community do, based upon what you've said, to continue that thought? Not just so much that President Obama's in the office, but just kind of, you know, help our own community and help ourselves. What are some of your suggestions?
Well, you know, if you talk in terms of helping ourselves, I think the one thing that will help us more than anything else is when our kids see that we're productive. And when I say that is we cannot have a community where we do not own the businesses. You know, I think we're the laughing stock of the world. Here we are, foreigners come in and grab up the delis and all the other little businesses, and we're out on the corners begging for a program. This community has been totally destroyed by government programs. And first off, we have to take our manhood and our womanhood back, because we don't do that. Our kids will never respect us.
And how will we do, like, take our manhood and woman, like,
Well,
small business is one?
And I think we have to begin to take over the businesses in our own community, hire our own people, put our own people to work. Now, if we do like the Koreans, and the Koreans help their own people to open businesses, our churches should have more responsibility than for people to go in every Sunday and drop money in the pot. If you're going to invest that money into community ventures, that's great.
Right.
But if you're not, it's worthless to me.
Right.
And so we do things sort of backwards. We donate a lot of money to nonprofit organizations. That's what a church is. It made a minister make a lot of money, but that's about the only one. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So the monies that is generated must be put into some other avenues to create money.
Well, you know what, I think.
And I'm not your leader. You know, you people vote for folks to represent them. I don't fall into none of those categories.
Well, you have spoken very well today. You have definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things. I want to thank you so much for joining the program today. Very good dialogue. So thank you so much for coming, Mr. Kirkland. And we have to bring you back so we can continue this dialogue.
I don't know. You get me all beat up in the street.
No.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on the Parent Advocacy Program.